Starfield launched on PC with a few quirks. There were some noticeable issues with the game. And one of the things I noticed was that the PC performance was a bit weird. First of all, it was extremely demanding on the CPU and the GPU, both of them, but also more demanding on Nvidia GPUs than AMD GPUs. As you can see behind me here in my initial testing, where cards that normally perform, whoa, I meant to fly around, not my background. Here we go. Anyway, cards that normally compare pretty comparably. The AMD GPU had a bit of an advantage at high settings, a bit more than normal, but some games are just like that. But then if we jump forward to the ultra settings, sometimes the Nvidia GPUs would just completely start crashing and pulling further and further behind, as I noticed in this initial testing where the gaps finished quite poorly for the Nvidia GPUs. The game also had some other, quality of life things. There was no DLSS support, just FSR support. There was all sorts of complaints. Well, now Starfield has now finally had a major update, but it's currently in a beta version. But I've been able to test this out to see if we've resolved some of the performance issues on the PC. The beta update, they have instructions for how to install that. It's really, really simple. If you have it on Steam, you just go to the Starfield game, select properties, and open up the betas drop-down and select beta, and then it'll download the update. At first I thought it was kind of weird. I don't see a lot of games do their patches through a beta version first, but then I was thinking about it, and I thought for Starfield that actually could make a lot of sense with the modding community, because new updates can break mods, and so many people run mods in these styles of games. This might actually be nice for modders to be able to adjust their mods in the beta version of the patch, to get it ready for the official launch. I have no idea if that's why they're doing this, but that did cross my mind as a potential highlight. We get Nvidia DLSS support, including frame generation and DLAA, Nvidia Reflex, although they currently mention that you have to manually toggle off VSync in the game for it to work properly. But they're also highlighting some CPU render threading improvements. So we're definitely going to test if CPU performance has improved. But they're also mentioning GPU performance optimizations, which they mention may be more impactful on some cards than others. And I think that's really interesting. There were some other notes like improved the appearance of the eyes on crowd characters. So is it the end of these memes? Anyway, let's find out. I'm actually not going to test the eye thing, but I did go ahead and do a whole bunch of performance testing. This patch is not just about DLSS, guys. Oh, I also tested out some ARC GPUs to see if there's been some improvements, because at launch, they didn't even launch. Anyway, first I'm testing out some CPU performance numbers. And on the left side of the screen, we see the game at launch. On the right-hand side of the screen, we see the game running in the patch 1.8.83 beta, and you can see that performance is higher on the new version of the game. I'm measuring about 8% in this particular scene. So I tested New Atlantis at launch. The game's not as demanding in some areas, but the city areas of the game can certainly be one of the more demanding areas on both the CPU and the GPU. So this is where my benchmarking will take place. And it does look like we have some CPU improvement on my 7800X3D. Now, I don't have a ton of CPUs nor a ton of systems set up for testing that. So that's as far as I'll go on the CPU testing, but let's get into some GPU testing. One of the GPUs I tested at launch was the RTX 4060 Ti. I also followed it up after one of the first initial patches that enabled, well, actually the patch didn't enable ResizeBAR support, but right around that same day, Nvidia dropped a driver that enabled ResizeBAR support. That ResizeBAR support was gaining 3 to 7% depending on the settings and the scene in the game. But now on patch 1.8.83, I'm gaining 27% versus launch. And I'd like us to just stop and appreciate for a second, guys. This is not DLSS doing this. This is just the game running at the ultra settings. Now, I did mention that the ultra settings were particularly broken on Nvidia GPUs right at launch. But yeah, we're gaining 27% versus launch on these settings. In fact, it was so dramatic, I was curious if this would apply to other settings. And I also tested out FSR. Now, why am I testing out FSR when we had DLSS? Well, I was actually worried when I was editing this footage that maybe I made a mistake and I had accidentally left FSR enabled when I was running the new test because of the dramatic performance uplift. It was much larger than what I was expecting. But you can see right here, I did enable FSR at 75% and compare versus that. And no, I wasn't messing up the settings, and even at these settings, I'm still seeing the performance scaling. So again, at launch, set at the baseline here, we were at 44 frames per second, now we're up at 54. ResizeBAR support is playing into that as well, but that's already kind of factored in. I was also curious, was this just fixing the broken ultra settings? And by the way, it was really the ultra shadows. I think some other channels dug in deep and kind of found where that particular issue was. But no, it's not just on the ultra settings. I went down to high settings, and once again, I'm seeing a 27% performance bump. And again, rebar in the middle got you that initial 5. So this is a significant performance update, not just a DLSS update. Now, I didn't have time to test out a wide variety of GPUs, and remember that the patch notes, if we hop back to those, does mention that this will be more impactful on higher end cards. So I don't know, this 4060 Ti 8GB version, it's not the highest end card, but it's certainly higher end than what a lot of people are on, but it's not like I'm testing a 4090 or something in this case. So I don't know exactly what to make of that on other GPUs, and I just, frankly, I'm busy, I'm teaching, all of that. I didn't have time to run a whole bunch of different GPUs. I was looking more at GPUs at the, one GPU at a lot of settings for Nvidia, and I'll look at AMD as well. But what I'm testing here was, once again, I was like, okay, this really isn't just like accidentally lowering the render resolution, right? Like this really happened, didn't it? So this is just me confirming that. If you go to the high settings, and by the way, why do I think I would accidentally be lowering the render resolution? This is one of those games that builds in FSR presets into their graphics preset toggles, so you can. It's very easy to accidentally kick on FSR when you don't mean to. Now, I was very careful about that, but again, the performance jump was so much, it was suspicious. But no, when I set them all to the same FSR percentage, I still saw good performance scaling. So this is now testing out DLSS. So to be clear, what we're looking at here now, I'll kind of fly out of the way. What we're looking at now is the basically, here's the high settings with FSR, which defaults to 62% if you select the high preset. If I switch over to DLSS and I set the same render percentage, 62%, and here it is with frame generation on. Now, I'm not showing the relative performance difference with frame gen on because those really aren't the same kind of frames, not the same quality. It doesn't increase the responsiveness of the game, but it can increase motion fluidity. Let me actually hop back in that just for a second to mention a couple other things I wanted to mention about the DLSS. So first of all, DLSS versus FSR performs similarly. I'm seeing a 4% gain on DLSS versus FSR at the same render percentage, but that's not really the point. The main reason why most people wanted the DLSS built into the game was because it often can offer better image quality, a sharper, more stable image compared to what FSR can in certain scenes. Now, this was certainly not really an image quality analysis, although some people have already conducted image quality analysis of DLSS versus FSR in this game through the mods that were implemented day one. It will be interesting to see how it looks, versus DLSS on the official implementation. I can say to my eye, the foliage and things did look a little bit sharper. Sorry, the last thing I wanted to mention is notice that I'm saying that I'm running DLSS at 62% here. So this game is kind of interesting in that in the graphics menu, it gives you a render resolution slider when you had FSR enabled. And that's unusual. Usually games allow you to select certain presets, quality, balanced, performance. And DLSS usually also works at that same way. Well, it looks like DLSS is able to be controlled through that same render percentage slider. It also has the quality, balanced, performance settings, as well as DLAA. But it also lets you adjust the slider, which, and I did test to make sure performance was changing when I adjusted the slider. So this is interesting in that you can have more granular control over your DLSS render percentage now than you do in most games. I also haven't really had enough time to play test with frame generation on to decide how I feel about it in this game. In some games, I feel like frame generation is a net benefit. In some games, I don't. It certainly can help you push through CPU limits, which is nice. So if you're CPU limited in this game, that would be definitely a good thing. But yeah, in some games, the image quality artifacts bug me more than others. The next thing I wanted to test is, okay, we saw massive performance jumps on Nvidia GPUs, even without DLSS enabled. Are we going to see the same thing on AMD? So at launch, I had tested the 7800 XT, and I'd also updated my testing for patch 1.7.29, and now we're looking at the beta patch. And while performance has improved, it's very, very small improvement. This is looking at the Ultra preset. So keep in mind that at the when the game launched, Nvidia GPUs were underperforming versus their AMD counterparts. What I mean by that is there's certain GPUs that generally offer similar performance on average in most games, and the Nvidia GPUs were underperforming relative to what is normal when this game launched. So it's looking like the Nvidia GPUs are kind of really, seems like to me, if you're getting that 20% or so bump, what you're really doing is getting back to where they probably should have been when the game launched if you look at how these GPUs relatively perform. Now, that's a pretty general statement when I only tested the 4060 Ti. So I don't know if that's going to be across the board, but at least for that card that I have tested, it seems like it's getting back to where it should have been already. Anyway, I was also testing if FSR performed any differently or anything like that on the 7800 XT. Seems like it's pretty similar. And then I also tested out the high preset to see if that responded any differently to the ultra preset, because sometimes, like I said, certain graphic settings cause issues and get more optimized. So I did also look at the high settings on the 7800 XT, and again, it looks like a 4% gain versus launch. That isn't nothing, it's certainly something, but it's not the dramatic performance gain that I was measuring on the 4060 Ti. Let's go ahead and move on to Intel GPUs. So at launch, Intel GPUs just were a failure to launch. By patch 1.729, Intel had released a driver update, and I think the game had been, patched a bit, and the game actually did launch. Now, trying to run at 1080p ultra settings on my Arc A750 was well below 30 FPS, and now testing on the newest drivers, as well as on this newest beta version of the game, I'm still well under 30 FPS, and I'm actually performing worse on the new driver than I did on the previous driver, but percentages might make it look, more dramatic than it is. I tested out some other settings. I also, so I looked at high settings at the default preset, which does include FSR at 62% render resolution scale, which at 1080p looks very bad, in my opinion. Anyway, we're at 30-ish FPS. At these settings, I'm actually measuring a 3% performance uplift, so basically 1 frame per second difference for the new patch in its favor. In general, though, I would say performance seems pretty similar, but at least compared to launch, it launches. So there is that, and you can get into around 30 FPS here. Anyway, that's pretty much it, I think, for my testing today. I think I've actually forgot to update the thing here. This was actually testing low settings. So low settings, and I think this is 50% render resolution scale, so I'm gonna cover that up there. Forgot to update the caption. I'm again actually measuring slightly lower performance on the beta version now versus patch 1.729. I don't know what's going on with Intel Arc GPUs in this game. It certainly doesn't look great. But overall, what are my thoughts on Starfield and this patch? Well, it certainly seems like there are some GPU performance optimizations that I can at least confirm make a dramatic difference on the 4060 Ti, and perhaps make a dramatic difference on some other cards as well, but I didn't have time to test that in this video. I'd be very interested in the comment section if you leave your thoughts on that. We also did see some CPU usage, some CPU performance improvement in New Atlantis, which can be CPU bound on my 7800X3D. Again, I'm curious your guys' results. You could let me know in the comment section if you feel like your CPU limited performance has improved. By the way, if you're not sure how to test, like, are you CPU limited? There's a lot of ways to do it. But one of the easiest things is if you open up something like MSI Afterburner, a Riva Tuner statistics server, and you look at the GPU usage percentage, which I think I'm actually covering up here. Here we go. The GPU usage percentage is significantly below 100%, then your GPU is most likely waiting on your CPU unless you've imposed some other kind of frame time limit. It can be a little more complicated than that, but that usually gets the job done. Anyway, I'm curious if your CPU limited performance has improved. Looks like there's also some improvements to gameplay, some mouse movement improvements. That sounds really nice. A whole bunch of other notes. One of the other big things being HDR brightness adjustments for systems that support it, saying Xbox and Windows 11, so perhaps the game's still kind of relying more on auto HDR than a true HDR implementation. I don't know, but it's still an improvement. Looks like some Quest fixes, all sorts of things. Anyway, I've been holding off on playing this game because it just felt like at launch, the game was really not where it needed to be, and as with many games, the better experience would probably be after a number of patches. This certainly looks like, especially for Nvidia users, we're in a much better place than we used to be at launch. So maybe this is a good time to pop into the game and take a look. I don't know, what are you guys' thoughts on the game? Like I said, I haven't actually sat down and played much of it other than just for benchmarking purposes because I've been waiting. I also want to finish Alan Wake 2 and Baldur's Gate 3. I'm at partway into both of those, and I want to finish the Phantom Liberty update. There's been too many games. I don't have time to play. I guess that's a good problem to have. I hope all of you have an excellent day, and maybe we won't see these haunting our dreams anymore.